I want to get us into these breakout groups now. Jim's going to do that part, and I'm going to write the 2 questions in the chat, and I think there's a way for the breakout group to have the questions come in, but we weren't certain of that, so forgive us for that. And so we'll go into breakout groups, and 4 to 5 people each. And when you return, we're going to want to hear 2 or 3 main things that came up in your discussion. Okay. And come back in 15 minutes.
And do we have a focus question? Oh, you're going to put it in the chat.
It's in the chat.
There's 2 questions in the chat. Okay.
Okay.
When have you seen this practice work, and what is your experience with this practice?
Okay.
I'm going to send you to rooms for 15 minutes, and then there'll be a 120-second chance to wrap things up and figure out your 2 to 3 points or whatever, and we'll be back together. And I made a whole bunch of people co-hosts. If anybody knows how to record,
In your group,
just go ahead and do it, but that's beyond me. See you in 15 minutes.
What are the 2 questions?
Where have you seen this practice work? And what is your experience with this practice? And
There you go.
practice is inventory.
The first thing that came to my mind was that I facilitated a political party strategic plan. There are multiple parties in Cyprus, but so one of the particular parties asked me to facilitate their strategic plan, and I did. As some of you know, I did use up front a lot the mind styles and the spiral dynamics V-memes. And so in this case, I used the V-memes and simply asked the question of where is this set of values and beliefs going on in Cyprus, and where, and who's the leader of it. And before they actually did their concrete strategic plan. So, you know, you can change the language of what the inventory, that was so different to them. That's never the way they had ever analyzed anything as a political party.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, then they also were, it gave them a way to deal different ways with different ordinary leaders, depending on what the values and the assumptions that various people within Cyprus were operating out of. And it was a far more comprehensive plan than it would have been otherwise. And he got elected. But that was, I didn't realize it at the time that I was doing an inventory, or I was facilitating an inventory.
Last week we had Hije from ORP in Korea present in 3 languages, English, Korean, and Chinese, what they did to look at how the North and South of Korea could be in peace.
Mm.
How could they bring about peace? And I was impressed that they raised the question and they got the funding from the UN. And it's been a 2-year process. And she, to prepare, she said to Larry, this is very messy, you know, when people are discussing their political differences rather than what is the possibility of talking together and being in peace together. It's very messy. And she said, sometimes they talk and sometimes they don't. And then she said, but you're the facilitator, so you just keep asking. And what would you like to see? What would be the advantages to having this discussion? And what could we do? And what is possible? Oh, how, if you want to protect South Korea and North Korea, then wouldn't it be good to have some talking points about what you would like to see in the future? And so from there, they were able to create a treaty. And when they created the treaty was written by professional treaty writers from the UN. But the original brainstorms came from the local people. And so it was a shock because that in the rooms that we were in, we had China and Taiwan who were speaking Chinese together. And their positions were, well, we can't talk about this. Why can't we talk about this? Because we have decided we're separate. And some people believe we're still together. And so it was a shock. But at the same time, you had to prepare yourself to be open-minded, to look at the future. If we don't talk about it, who's going to talk about it?
Mhm.
Or are we just going to, throw bombs and stuff at each other? So it was a great experience because once you open the door of possibility, you have to continue to forge through all of the details so that people are able to grab hold of what they believe is possible. And the questions that we're asking, I think, is good, but I also liked, it says, Jesus is not magic, but presence in the midst. So if you are the presence of possibility in the midst, you have to find the right words and the right questions in order for people to open the door to possibility. That had never, I mean, yes, of course, I facilitate, but I remember we went on a family retreat to Mexico, to South Padre Island, and we went across the border to buy birthday presents for everybody because we were having an argument about whose birthday it was this week and last week, and why didn't we celebrate everybody's birthday. So we bought each person, one person was assigned to buy something for themselves and something for another person. And we had a nephew who bought a switchblade knife, which he did not plan to give to anybody. And when he brought it to the table, or when it was discovered, he was told that he was unforgivable because A, he didn't buy a present for somebody else, and it was an inappropriate thing to do. And so his parents cried because they didn't want the grandchild to be accused by the grandfather that this was an inappropriate, this was an unforgivable action. And so for 3 hours, everybody kept talking and talking and talking and talking. And finally, someone said, maybe we should change the word unforgivable. In our context, that's a very powerful word. Maybe we should change it to inappropriate. And the whole room went silent. And of course, Phil turned to us and said, I wish you had said that 3 hours ago. It's like you gotta let go of the anger and the resentment and the accusation and figure out how to talk together again. And I'm complete. Somebody else. Oh,
Oh, I was just thinking about, for the last 2 years, I've been working with a group of technical writers, trying to get them to write much more simply. Instead of having, several 100,000 topics, to boil it down to what people really need to know and to make it findable and searchable and all that stuff. And the only place you could start with something like that is where they are. You can't start by telling them what they should be doing because everyone's attached. They see what they see.
yes.
They know they're proud of what they've done because they've done it. And so one of the things about inventory is finding strengths in what they already do that you can build on. It's a very small example, but it certainly has taken a lot of effort.
That makes sense.
So let's figure out now how it fits in with the other practices. Because just doing it, I'm trying to remember here, the listening part, these practices, it's amazing how he takes little teeny pieces for, of a whole, of a very short biblical story. How would we connect them to what I wanted the chart of the whole book so my husband would see where we've come.
So it's retreat.
It was being rooted. So you do focus in order to be rooted. But he spread the comprehensiveness out in terms of you, even wherever you are rooted, you take both the internal and the external of the situation into your awareness. What was the one we did right before that?
Discernment.
Retreat. What? Discernment. Goodness, okay.
And so, like Recovering Abundance, Chapter 3, the sections were, I don't like when people stereotype entire cultures. Then we said temptations of scarcity mindset are salvation by relocation, the middle of nowhere, and the stability of the desert. And then power of stability was stability and spiritual renewal and stability and social change. And the gift of stability to community is brain gain and stability and testimony. So
It puzzles me though, is spiritual and then everything, and then there's everything else?
yeah,
Is
there were
internal spiritual and then
was
everything else external?
yes, spiritual stability and then stability. Oh wait, stability and spiritual renewal. These are just the top categories of last week.
Oh,
Stability and social change, and then the gifts of stability to community.
we're out.
But ours this week is power and dispossession and making a miracle.
Right.
Mm,
The
Rich,
miracles, yeah.
yes.
Basically, I think he almost does. What sort of occurred to me, because I just started the next one too, is that he touches on each one of his chapters in each chapter.
Yeah, I think so.
Mm.
And that list of things in community capital, the different types of community capital, that takes a lot of discernment, and you've got to work with people to look, to see.
Yes.
And, yeah, to do the listening and decision making. You have to decide to do the inventory, of course. Discern that it's needed.
Would you like to hear a story
Yeah.
Sure.
about listening? I've been tracking what's going on in the breakup of the United Methodist Church. And
Mm.
so today I tuned into YouTube and started listening to the enemy. That is, to the people whom I radically disagree with. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So what shocked me in listening to the enemy is the grief that they express.
All right. Well, let's hear back from the groups. If you recall which group number you were in, let's hear from group one. 2 or 3 things you talked about.
So Marshall, why don't you just continue the story that you were telling when we got shifted?
Well, I'm done. You want to hear it again?
Yes.
Oh, is it
We
done?
didn't hear all of it. Quick.
The last
Go
one.
and tell it again.
All right, it's very short. I have been tuning in to the slow motion breakup of the United Methodist Church, including paying attention to the people who were doing things that I think are horrible. So what I was doing today, this afternoon, was watching on YouTube and listening to the enemy. The reason I mention any of this was what shocked me is the amount of grief that they articulate. It's like being on a one-way trip to Mars and having to leave behind the church that's nurtured you for your whole life, and you can never come back. I'm grieving over the loss of the people who are leaving, but I hadn't heard until today the depth of grief among the people who are on their trip to Mars. End of story. Oh, except to say that humanizes them.
Mhm.
Mhm.
They're no longer the enemy. They're just confused and very upset and feeling the
Pain.
loss of the rest of us.
Mm.
So while I'm at it, let me speak to the book, to this chapter. There's one thing I would add to this chapter that he doesn't say. When he says look to what we have, okay, what he's pointing to is local resources.
Mhm.
Okay. What I would add to that is we have not only to discover local resources that we didn't know about, but we uniquely have global resources. I'm sitting here and connected with Mary de Curian de Souza in India. That is amazing.
Mhm.
That's true.
We bring something to the local that people in the local don't always understand that they're connected with.
Mm.
End of story.
And that you've put your finger on one of the reasons why I had to really struggle through last week's study.
Say a little more, Ronnie.
Oh, that it's one thing to be rooted, to be stable, but
Mhm.
in our experience, we that connection to Mary or whoever, in our lives has changed who we are. And we bring something comes through from that seems a little strange sometimes to people, but is also intriguing sometimes. But it's not something we can turn off. And it's not a question of being mobile or rooted, whether that is true. Anyway.
Okay.
I also thought that the comment in the group that Ronnie made, which was, you have to start where they are. You have to find out where they are first before you can ask the question of how they're going to change. You have to find out where they are and what's important to them, and before they are willing to go the next step. And I thought that's important because, often you're asking the future question without asking them, where are you right now?
And they have to know that you are interested in that question.
Yeah.
Not just because you need it to move forward, but because you are, yeah.
It's going to make a difference in what your response is.
Yes.
Okay. Any more from group one? Thank you. Group two. What are a couple of things that you talked about? I know that was Jim. Was that your group? Jim and Jill and Mary? Was that the group? Group two?
That is right.
What?
What did we talk about?
Yeah. This isn't a right answer question. This is just what happened. What did you talk about?
What did we talk about?
We talked about experiencing the inventory and how, well, one of the things that I brought up and suggested is that every time we did town meetings, it was a way of initially taking inventory of what the resources was within the community and allowing the people to see the resources that they might have been overlooking that they had and how they could use them to create the life and the future and the vision that they wanted for themselves. And then we took off from there.
Mhm.
I think I came to see that you don't go do inventory just because it's a good idea. There's a very concrete need that pushes you, or you resist being pushed. But if the need is great enough, you end up doing inventory. What you hope, what you pray for, is that you do it in the manner that Andy has talked about, in a manner that opens up possibilities. But one way or another, you don't just sit around and say, oh, let's go do an inventory. There's something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, you have to even identify what your project might need even before you would do an inventory, things like that.
We kind of, I think, had a lot of stories about being kind of in the position of the disciples.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, we got this big thing, you know, or I got these neighbors, but I don't know how to go talk to them, or there's this group and we're planning and there's something not right about what's happening with the planning and up. So this whole dimension of figuring out a way to have Jesus come in and say, go see, is an important aspect of this this notion of inventory, along with what Ruth was saying about, you know, a need like all those 5,000 hungry people out in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And that's why inventory is an ongoing personal piece of work. I mean, it's never put down, because go and see is about us seeing, and it's us that's seeing. And so if we are the ones seeing, then we need to be very careful about understanding what we bring to the table, how we see, who we are, what our skills and abilities are, what our frame is, what our positioning is over against other folks we're working with, etc.
So where our blind spots are.
That self-awareness is an absolute necessity to be successful with asset mapping or with doing inventory. And so we're in a constant process of that. We are, you know, needing to be very clear about who we are and what we're up to.
Okay. Let's go to group 3. Martin, you were in our group. Martine, I'm sorry. And Karen and Larry. We heard a great story from Martine about his first, was it your first congregation? And how they turned things around for him. And made a difficult situation something they could do with what they had.
I mean, for me, it was a story of taking inventory and learning about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot about my congregation and where they were going and how they considered assets. I was considering assets in a completely different frame, and they had to correct me, literally.
Yeah.
So you know, it's a process where we also have a chance to get redirected and repositioned to be more effectively connected to our brothers and sisters for the work to move forward.
You were also in that moment, Martin.
Yeah. Yes.
If someone else had been sitting and not allowed her to hold it down.
And
One key moment in this that I explained to the group was a parishioner yanking my yanking me by my collar back into my seat twice.
Oh,
And he stayed there. Yes. And Larry shared a quick story in an open discussion session where he got started with a large group of people, over 100, and they sort of stopped it at a point, and a few of them went out of the room, and
Not as
for
many,
about 10 minutes.
145 out of the 150 walked out of the room.
Oh my, okay.
ouch.
And they didn't come back for 10 minutes. I opened the space. It was an open space exercise. I opened the space. 145 people stood up and walked out. And I'm talking to the president of the company, and he said, "What's going on?" I said, "Oh, this happens, all the time. This is common." Then about 10 minutes later, the 145 people come back in and said, "Okay, we're ready to start." So then away we went. And everything changed because they had gone through a process of deciding to be there.
Mhm.
So that's, yeah, we're talking like this process of inventory is a sure thing. Just say go see and it'll all be figured out. But nobody, but there's this dimension of not at, well, what Larry just said, people don't want to, and there's also the dimension of you don't know if there's something there. And you don't know if it's the moment to decide to see what's there. Somebody made a comment, or I guess Ruth made a comment earlier about the climate crisis and all that sort of thing. And
Mhm.
listening to a conversation among science fiction writers, and they were talking about how dystopian science fiction is these days. And one person said, well, depending on the depth of what's happening, you got to dwell in the dystopia a little bit before the time comes for some kind of different vision or something new to come out. And I found myself maybe having a rationale for why they included the revelation of St. John in the New Testament. It sort of deals with that sort of time when things are ending and haven't started, and there's no easy practical solution just there. So it's like you can go and see and not find anything. You can go and look internally and still kid yourself.
That's Lamentations, Jeremiah, and Revelation.
I'm
And
sorry.
Joseph.
Thank you. Lamentations.
Yeah. Well, what are the key ingredients then, or other key ingredients of the inventory practice as we've been learning?
Well, that example that Jim was just talking about, sometimes you got to wait. Part of inventorying is you might not get everything you need right now.
The other thing,
I think, yeah, go ahead. Marcia.
having new eyes to see what the ordinary doesn't see.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
There's a model called Theory U, which you go down the one side of the U, and what you're doing there is the inventory. You're trying to help yourself see everything. And then at the bottom of the U, you're taking that inventory and then you're letting it go. Because you have to wait for the new emergence to emerge. And the only way the new emergence can emerge is if you let go of the assumption of what that inventory means, or the assumptions of what the result is going to be. And then the new emerges, whatever it is, and you begin to crystallize and make an image, make that implementation real. But the key piece is first the inventory. Do I try to see everything? And then second is letting it go, because I have no idea. The Martine's story was profound. One of the places profound was what emerged was completely different than what the meeting was assumed to be about, and yet it transformed the whole piece. You could also, I mean, I'm sure there's somebody else in that same meeting who has a very different story about how we lost everything because of this decision. And anyway, but the transformation only comes from what's emerged, and we never know what that will be. Complete.
Go ahead.
Well, it just seems like a wonderful transition to the next chapter on imagination. I don't know.
Yes, yes.
Oh,
And
Before we jump into that, the other part of inventory is the language we use.
oh yeah,
What words, how do we express what we do have? Do we see the depression, or do we see the possibilities? And Pine Ridge is an excellent example of that. And I think, what was it, the women of Newport or Report or something?
yeah. It's in the
their community was
Women of Commons.
their community was being maligned and by the press, and so they decided to start their own promotion of their community and sing it in a positive way rather than in a negative way.
I have a sister-in-law who lives in Eastport. It's a very interesting place.
Okay. Well, I'm going to just share the thing I was struck again about this is a practice. It's just not a procedural thing he's trying to get to, but it's something you internalize and can help inform your leadership. It's not like a tool or a skill. I don't think it's more of a perspective. And as I was preparing the study, I was driving back from Seattle and I had my aha. I'm going to just share it here. Jim shared it with you in the email, but it dawned on me that if the practice of retreat gets you away for a new viewpoint, and the presence of discernment, or the practice of discernment, helps you decide whether to engage or not. The practice of stability helps you stand where you are. And Ronnie, if that's where you need to stand, I understand. And the practice of inventory then enables you to enter the situation and ask inquiring questions. It's like you enter that with all of those things, all those channels open and ready for some things new.
Sharon, I thought your 4 little comments on that were quite astute, and I appreciated that kind of summary that got us zip, zip, zip through the 4 chapters. It was nice.
Thanks. It sort of got me grounded in a way with what he was doing with things. I think, Jim, we should end this formal study part and go to a closing reflection. And I think our time is good. But what were highlights from this morning's session?
I wanted to just say how grateful I am to be studying this book with this group. It's just amazing to me. I feel like I'm one of all of you, and we all got our PhDs in this area 50 years ago. And now we're back in kindergarten discovering the same stuff with a new kind of wonder. And the best part is the guy who wrote the book didn't know who we are. And that says something. He's a different generation. He's a young upstart.
Mhm.
And long after we're gone, he's going to be doing this stuff. And that's just amazing to me.
It's just simply a reminder that we were not the church. The church is always out there in process of being. And it's fun to connect up with those who are also out there.
Well, and in terms of inventory, we're videotaping all this stuff now, so it won't be forgotten, like what happened.
This particular chapter has really helped me. I mean, I am doing a kind of a vast inventory around housing for for my church, for the Southwest Pennsylvania Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, for engagement moving forward in the next year. And this process of thinking about inventory and the process of actually laying out what we have been thinking about as possible ways of moving forward in terms of engagement has really kind of changed my thinking around how we should re-engage our conversation kind of in a different way. And we have the opportunity to do that. It's about 25 people with housing expertise meeting in a series of Zoom meetings. And we've been going down one path, and I think we need to go down another. So that may be a suggestion for the next time we come together.
Mm.
And you'll let us know if somebody grabs you by the collar, won't you?
I'd like to talk with you, Martine, about that, because where my church is in the University District in Seattle, about 20 years ago, an architect who was at the Lutheran Church worked with others of us ecumenical parish to do an assessment. Literally, he went in and detailed all of the assets in every single building of every single church in the neighborhood. And what happened to us in our church was we saw what the whole church was an asset. We were thinking we were poor, we don't have any money, we can't fix our roof, everything's falling apart, and we're diminishing. And he said, no, there's value here, and use that value to make something new. So we've taken our building down. We're in partnership with the developer who's paying us to build the building for towers of student housing across from the university and the church in the middle of it. And, that totally turned things around. So there's something there. Other highlights.
It's the half hour, whatever. And we're taking a break next week, which would have been October 31st, which is a strange day in the Northern Hemisphere, when all kinds of spirits and goblins and every other thing. And we just want to give people a chance to take inventory of the strange spirits that come out on the street as sundown happens earlier. And we'll be back together on November 7th. And Karen's going to take us on a tour of the practice of imagination.
That's a good one for Karen.
Yeah.
And we're complete, and we can chat forever if we want.
Thank you. Oh,
Thank you.
Thank
I'm going
you.
back to bed. See you all.
Thank you, Mary. I hope.
Mary.
Wow. Great